She had never expected her life to take a turn like this. For years, she had moved quietly through her days, working, living, and finding comfort in the small joys that most people overlooked. The piano in her small apartment had been her sanctuary for as long as she could remember. Its worn keys, some chipped, others sticky from years of use, held a world where she could express herself without fear, without judgment. Music had been her friend when the rest of the world felt distant. It was a place where she could feel alive and free, even if no one else ever heard her play. That evening began like any other. She had spent the day running errands, preparing a modest dinner, and finishing up a few pieces she had been practicing. Her hands still carried the slight stiffness from the cold morning, but there was a quiet excitement in her chest. Little did she know that tonight, everything was about to change. She had been asked to attend a small gathering, nothing formal, nothing she thought would matter. It was a neighbor, someone she barely knew, insisting that she bring her presence and her piano skills for a brief moment of entertainment. At first, she had hesitated. She had never performed in front of strangers. The thought of all those eyes watching, waiting, judging, made her stomach twist. She had always played for herself, for the music, for the emotions that it allowed her to feel. But there was something in the way the neighbor asked that made it hard to refuse. Just a simple tune, they had said. Nothing fancy. Something easy. She had nodded, unsure of why she agreed, but a quiet curiosity had taken root. Maybe it was time to see how the outside world responded to her music, even in the smallest way. The venue was modest, a cozy room filled with soft lighting, gentle laughter, and the quiet hum of conversation. She arrived a little early, clutching her bag nervously, feeling the weight of every step she took toward the piano. The instrument sat in the corner, gleaming under the lights, and for a moment, she hesitated. Its polished surface reflected her face back at her, showing the mix of doubt and anticipation in her eyes. She wondered if she truly belonged here, if her music would be enough, or if it would falter, leaving an awkward silence that she would never forgive herself for. When she finally approached the piano, she took a deep breath. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, but the room felt alive in a way her apartment never had. The audience, though small, carried a sense of expectation. They were polite, kind, but their attention weighed on her shoulders. She reminded herself of the neighbor's words, "Simple, keep it simple." That simple instruction became her anchor. She would start with a basic melody, nothing complicated, and let the music grow naturally if it needed to. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the memories of every quiet evening, every lonely afternoon spent at this instrument, guide her. Then gently, she pressed down on the first note. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried warmth. A simple tune flowed, delicate and unassuming. She opened her eyes and looked up. The audience was listening. Their polite smiles and gentle nods encouraged her to continue. As the melody progressed, she began to feel something shift inside her. The music that had always been her private escape was starting to take on a new life. She realized that each note, each pause, each gentle rise and fall of the keys could touch someone outside of her own heart. She didn't need to perform for applause, for recognition, or for approval. She only needed to allow herself to feel, and the audience would feel it too. Started slowly. A woman at the edge of the room smiled, her eyes softening, as if remembering a long-forgotten memory. A man sitting near the piano leaned forward, absorbed in the gentle harmony that now seemed to fill the room with a quiet magic. The sounds that had once been private, hidden in her apartment, now belonged to everyone present, and the realization made her hands move with more confidence. She allowed herself to play freely, letting the music guide her. The simple tune began to grow, evolving naturally into something richer, more expressive. She wasn't thinking about technique or perfection anymore. She was thinking about emotion, about connection, about sharing a piece of herself in the only way she knew how. The notes spilled out, each one carrying a fragment of her life. The joy, the sorrow, the quiet victories, the endless hours of practice when no one watched. The audience felt it too. There was a shift in the room, subtle at first, then undeniable. The simple tune had become a story, and they were part of it. People leaned closer, their attention fully captured, their faces showing the vulnerability that comes when something unexpected touches the heart. She noticed a few wiping away small tears, a hand covering a mouth in quiet awe, eyes glistening with emotion. She herself began to feel something stirring that she had never expected. The nervousness, the doubt, the fear of not being enough began to melt away. She was no longer just playing for herself. She was playing for this moment, for these people, for the connection that only music could create. Her fingers moved faster now, yet with gentleness, producing harmonies that seemed to float in the air, wrapping around the listeners, drawing them closer into her world. The room became a cocoon of sound and emotion. Laughter and conversation had faded, replaced by the quiet resonance of the piano. Every note she played seemed to hold a story, and every listener responded with their own memories, feelings, and reflections. She realized that the simple instruction to play something easy had been the perfect setup. It allowed her to start small, and yet the music carried her far beyond the boundaries she had imagined. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself be carried entirely by the rhythm and melody. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of her voice, a mirror of her soul, a bridge to the hearts of those around her. She noticed the subtle changes in the audience. Quiet sighs, gentle nods, a collective sense of awe that she had never intended to inspire but could not ignore. When she finally slowed the tempo and allowed the final notes to linger in the air, there was a pause. It was a silence filled with weight and meaning, a moment where the room seemed to hold its breath, not daring to break the spell that had been woven. She looked up and saw faces she barely knew, yet in their eyes was a reflection of what she had poured out through her music. Admiration, wonder, and a hint of tears. It was in that moment she realized the power she had always carried within herself. The simple piano, the modest skills she had nurtured for years, could move people, could touch hearts in a way words never could. What began as a quiet evening, a hesitant performance, had become something extraordinary. She had shared a part of her soul, and the world had responded with the language of emotion. Pure, unspoken, and deeply human. As the room finally erupted into gentle applause, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. She smiled, almost shyly, acknowledging the appreciation without fully understanding how far she had moved them. She had never sought recognition, but in that quiet, glowing moment, she knew that her music had mattered. It had mattered to her, and unexpectedly, it had mattered to everyone who had listened. That night, as she left the gathering and walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she carried with her a sense of newfound confidence. The piano had always been her refuge, but now it was also a bridge that could connect her to others, that could share emotion, that could tell stories more powerfully than words ever could. She thought about the audience, their reactions, and the simple truth that had become clear. Sometimes, even the smallest gestures, even a simple tune, could leave a lasting impression, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. And so, she returned to her apartment, to her piano, with a quiet sense of purpose. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the music inside her could go further, reach deeper, and connect more souls than she had ever dared to dream. All it took was the courage to play, the willingness to share, and the trust in the magic that had always been inside her, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The days after that evening were unlike anything she had experienced before. She could hardly stop thinking about the performance, the faces of the audience, and the emotions that had filled the room. She kept replaying each moment in her mind, the hesitant first note, the way the music had seemed to grow on its own, the silence that had hung in the air before applause finally came. She hadn't expected it, not in the slightest, and yet she felt a quiet pride growing inside her, one that she had never known she could feel. Even though she returned to her usual routine, everything seemed slightly different. Walking through the small streets to work or running simple errands, she felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement at the possibility that music could change things. She found herself carrying the memory of the piano's keys under her fingers. The way the sound had echoed and reached people in ways words never could. She wondered what it would mean if she could do it again, if she could reach people even more deeply, and how that would feel. At work, she noticed small shifts in her own confidence. She had been quiet before, keeping her head down, doing her tasks, blending into the background. But now, there was a subtle spring in her step, a sense that she could exist in the world and still carry something unique, something meaningful. Her coworkers noticed it too. They commented on her smile, the way she seemed lighter, more present, and it made her realize that even small changes in her own belief in herself could ripple outward in unexpected ways. One afternoon, an unexpected invitation arrived. A local community event, organized by people she had never met, asked if she would perform a short piece on the piano. They emphasized that it didn't need to be complicated, just something simple that could entertain the crowd. Her first reaction was hesitation. The thought of performing again, of standing before strangers, made her stomach tighten. But the memory of that previous evening, the impact her music had had, gave her courage. She realized that maybe this was the opportunity she had been waiting for, to share more of herself, to see what her music could truly do. She spent the days leading up to the event practicing, though not obsessively. She didn't want to force anything or make the performance mechanical. Instead, she focused on letting the music flow naturally, remembering the joy and freedom she had felt the last time she played in front of others. She played quietly in her apartment, letting her hands explore melodies that she had only dared to dream about before. Each note seemed to carry more confidence, more emotion, and more clarity than before. She felt herself growing into the music, almost as if it had been waiting for her to discover it fully. On the day of the event, she arrived early, carrying a small bag with sheet music and a notebook she used for practice. The venue was larger this time, and she could hear the hum of conversations and laughter as people gathered. She felt the familiar mix of excitement and nervousness, the kind that makes your heart race, your hands tingle, and your mind suddenly focused on every detail. She reminded herself to breathe, to trust in her own ability, and to let the music speak for itself. When she approached the piano, she noticed the instrument was different from hers at home. The keys were smooth and polished, the sound deeper and richer. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she could adjust to it, if she could play as freely on a piano that wasn't her own. But then she remembered that music wasn't about the instrument itself. It was about the heart behind the hands, the emotion behind the notes. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and allowed herself to sink into the moment. She started with a simple melody, as requested, and immediately noticed the difference in the audience. This time, it wasn't just polite attention or quiet curiosity. People were watching with genuine interest, their eyes following her hands, their expressions softening as the music began to fill the room. She felt a warmth in the space, a quiet energy that encouraged her to continue. Her nervousness didn't disappear entirely, but it became manageable, replaced with a sense of purpose and focus she had never felt before. As she continued, she allowed herself to explore beyond the simple tune she had started with. She added subtle variations, gentle flourishes, and expressive pauses. The music grew richer and more layered, and she could feel it drawing the audience in. People leaned forward, unconsciously holding their breath, their attention fixed on her performance. She could see the way the notes touched them, the way a soft chord seemed to bring a tear to one person's eye, or how a rising melody made another smile knowingly, as if the music spoke to a memory only they could understand. She began to realize that this performance was different from the first. Before, she had played cautiously, unsure of her impact. This time, she felt a freedom, a trust in her own instincts and emotions. The music became a conversation, an invisible dialogue between her and the audience. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence, each pause a moment of shared understanding. She was no longer just playing. She was communicating, reaching across space and time, touching hearts in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The audience's reaction became increasingly emotional. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned back, letting small sighs escape as the notes carried memories, feelings, and emotions they hadn't realized they were holding. She noticed a few wiping at their eyes, a hand lightly pressed to a chest, a soft murmur of appreciation. She had expected polite applause or quiet enjoyment, but what she received was something deeper, more meaningful, and it filled her with a quiet awe. With every passing moment, she grew more confident, more immersed, and more connected. The simple tune she had started with evolved naturally into something intricate and emotional, guided by the music itself. She didn't plan it, didn't force it. She allowed it to unfold organically, trusting that her hands, her heart, and her mind knew the way, and the audience responded in kind, their faces reflecting astonishment, admiration, and emotional resonance. She could feel the energy in the room shifting. What had begun as a simple request, a casual performance, had become an experience that connected every person present. The music was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who was listening, everyone who had allowed themselves to feel. She realized that her role as a musician wasn't just to play notes, but to create moments, to evoke emotion, to share something profoundly human. As the piece reached its quiet conclusion, she allowed the final notes to linger, feeling the subtle vibrations in her fingertips and the way the sound hung in the air. She opened her eyes and looked up at the audience. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People were clapping, some standing, some still visibly moved by the performance. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a mix of relief, pride, and joy. She had done it again. She had shared a part of herself, and the world had responded with gratitude and admiration. After the performance, several people approached her, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the magic that had just happened. They complimented her skill, expressed how deeply they had felt the music, and asked questions about her training and experiences. She smiled politely, answering modestly, but inside she felt a quiet thrill. She realized that the music had given her a voice, one that could reach people in ways that words never could. That night, walking home, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the nervousness she had felt, the doubts she had carried, and the joy she had found in letting go and trusting herself. She realized that music was more than a hobby or a private escape. It was a way to connect, to touch lives, to create meaning and shared experience. She felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known before, a quiet determination to continue playing, exploring, and sharing her gift with the world. She also realized something else. The audience hadn't just responded to her skill, but to her authenticity. They had felt her honesty, her emotion, and her vulnerability. The piano was not simply an instrument. It was a bridge, a way to express what could not be said with words. And she understood that this gift, this ability to reach people, was hers to nurture and develop. It was a responsibility, but also a joy, one that she embraced fully. In the days that followed, she practiced with renewed energy, exploring new pieces, experimenting with variations, and allowing her emotions to guide her hands. She discovered nuances and depths in music she had never noticed before, as if the experience of performing for others had unlocked a new level of understanding and creativity. She began to feel more confident, more capable, and more certain that this path, this connection through music, was something she wanted to pursue further. At the same time, she remained humble. She knew that each performance, each audience would be different. Some might not respond as deeply, some might not understand, and some might simply listen politely. But she had learned that her role was not to seek approval, but to play honestly, to share her heart, and to trust that the right people would be touched. This understanding brought her a sense of peace and freedom she had never known before. By the end of part 2, she had grown in confidence, experience, and understanding. The nervous girl who had once hesitated to play a simple tune in front of strangers had begun to embrace her gift fully. She realized that the simple act of sharing her music could create profound moments of connection, emotion, and meaning. And with that realization, she was ready for whatever would come next, ready to explore the full potential of her talent, and ready to move even more hearts with the music she had always carried within her. The moment she walked into the hall that evening, a sense of anticipation wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She could hear voices, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses as people mingled, waiting for the music to begin. The room was larger than the last venue, with high ceilings that seemed to amplify every sound. She felt a familiar flutter in her chest, that mix of nerves and excitement she had come to recognize. But this time it was different. She wasn't playing only for herself anymore. She was beginning to understand that her music could touch people in ways she had never imagined, and that thought filled her with both awe and responsibility. The piano sat in the center of a small stage, polished and inviting. Its keys reflected the soft glow of the lights, and she ran her fingers lightly over them, feeling their smooth texture. There was a nervous excitement in her hands, a tingling sensation that reminded her of every quiet evening she had spent at home, practicing, learning, and perfecting her skills. She took a deep breath, remembering that her music wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty, emotion, and connection. That truth calmed her nerves and gave her confidence to begin. She started with a simple melody, just as the organizers had requested. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they carried warmth and clarity. She noticed heads turning, eyes following her hands, and a quiet stillness settling over the room. People were listening, not just politely, but with attention, their expressions softening as the music filled the space. She allowed herself to feel the moment fully, letting the emotions she had held back for so long flow naturally through her fingers. As the music progressed, she began to explore subtle variations. She added gentle flourishes, shifted the tempo slightly, and allowed pauses to linger, creating spaces for the audience to breathe and feel. The simple tune she had started with began to evolve, becoming richer, more expressive, and alive in a way she had never expected. She could sense the audience responding. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, their faces reflecting a quiet awe. She realized that each note, each chord, was reaching deeper than she had imagined, touching memories and emotions she could not see but could feel in return. She had always loved the piano for its ability to express what words could not. But tonight, she realized it could do something even more powerful. It could connect her with strangers in a deeply human way. She felt a thrill as she noticed small gestures. A hand pressed lightly to a chest, a quiet sigh, a tear slipping down someone's cheek. The music was no longer just a personal expression. It was a bridge between hearts, a way to share something profound without a single word. Her fingers moved with growing confidence, guided not by strict rules but by the flow of emotion. The simple melody was transforming into a story, and the audience was listening as if they were living it alongside her. She felt herself slipping into a state of complete focus, where nothing existed outside the notes, the piano, and the room full of people who were letting themselves feel. The nervousness she had carried for so long melted away, replaced by a quiet joy and a sense of purpose she had never known before. She noticed one older woman sitting near the front, her eyes closed, her lips pressed together as if holding back tears. Another man near the back shifted slightly in his seat, a soft smile spreading across his face. Children, usually restless in these kinds of gatherings, were sitting quietly, captivated by the sound that seemed to fill the room with warmth and meaning. She realized in that moment that the music had the power to move anyone, regardless of age or background, and it filled her with a quiet awe. As she continued, the tune grew bolder. She allowed her hands to explore the keys more freely, creating harmonies and rhythms that felt natural but also unexpected. The music became a living thing, evolving with each note, breathing with each pause. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, a collective sense of wonder that seemed to wrap around everyone present. The simple tune had transformed into an emotional journey, a story of joy, sorrow, hope, and reflection. She could sense the impact in the audience. People were leaning forward, their expressions softened, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles of recognition. It was as if the music had unlocked something within them, a memory or feeling they hadn't realized they were holding. She had never played for such an emotional response before, and yet it felt natural, almost effortless. She realized that this was the result of honesty, of playing from the heart, and allowing herself to be vulnerable in front of others. The climax of the piece approached, and she allowed herself to fully immerse in the emotion of the moment. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating a cascade of sound that was both powerful and tender. She felt the audience's energy rising with the music, a quiet wave of emotion that connected everyone in the room. It was a strange but beautiful sensation, to know that her music could create this shared experience, this unspoken bond between people who had only just met. She noticed subtle reactions throughout the room. A young man near the front had his hand over his mouth, holding back tears. An older couple sitting together squeezed each other's hands, moved by the beauty of the sound. Even those who were initially reserved or skeptical seemed captivated, their eyes bright, their attention fully on her. She realized that her music had become more than entertainment. It had become a source of emotion, of reflection, and of human connection. As the piece drew to its final notes, she allowed herself to slow down, to let the last chords linger in the air. She could feel the vibrations under her fingertips, the resonance filling the room and wrapping around the audience like a gentle embrace. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with emotion, as if the entire room was collectively holding its breath. And then, slowly, the first applause began, quiet at first, then building into a wave of appreciation and admiration. The audience was standing now, clapping, some still wiping away tears. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a mix of pride, relief, and joy. She had shared a part of herself, a part that had been hidden for so long, and it had been received with gratitude and emotion. She realized in that moment that her music was not just a skill or a hobby. It was a gift, a way to touch hearts and create memories that people would carry with them long after the performance ended. After the applause, several people approached her. They spoke in hushed tones, complimenting her skill, asking about her experiences, and expressing how deeply they had been moved. She smiled, answering modestly, but inside, she felt a quiet thrill. She had discovered something new about herself, a courage and confidence that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. She understood now that her role as a musician was not just to play notes, but to create moments, to evoke emotion, and to connect people in ways that words could never. Walking home later that night, she reflected on the performance. She thought about the nervousness she had felt before starting, the doubts she had carried, and the way the music had guided her through each emotion. She realized that fear had been a necessary part of the journey, pushing her to focus, to be honest, and to trust herself. But she also understood that the real magic came from allowing herself to be vulnerable, to play from the heart, and to share a piece of herself with the world. She returned to her apartment and sat quietly at her own piano, letting the keys remember her touch. She played softly, experimenting with new variations, exploring melodies she had never tried before. Each note seemed richer, more expressive, carrying not just sound, but the emotions of the evening and the connection she had felt with the audience. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. This was not just a performance. It was a beginning, a step into a future where her music could reach even further, touch even more hearts, and tell stories that had no words. The days that followed were filled with reflection and quiet practice. She noticed small changes in herself, more confidence, a deeper awareness of her emotions, and a stronger connection to the music she played. She realized that every performance, no matter the size, was an opportunity to share something meaningful, to create an emotional experience, and to connect with people in a profound way. Each time she played, she was learning not just about music, but about herself and the power of human emotion. By the end of part 3, she had transformed from a nervous musician into someone who understood the true potential of her gift. She had learned that her music could move people, create shared experiences, and touch hearts in ways that words never could. She felt ready to explore further, to take risks, and to allow herself to grow both as a musician and as a person. She had discovered that her music was not just a personal escape. It was a bridge, a language, and a gift she could share with the world. She could still feel the echoes of the last performance lingering in her mind as she prepared for the next one. It had been a few weeks since that evening when her music had moved so many people, and life had quietly shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Walking through the familiar streets, she noticed how different everything felt now. Even ordinary sounds, the chirping of birds, the hum of traffic, the laughter of children, seemed to blend into a symphony she could almost imagine playing on the piano. Her perspective had changed. She had realized that music wasn't just about notes. It was about feeling, presence, and connection. The invitation for this performance was unexpected but exciting. It was at a larger event, a community gathering in a hall she had never visited. The organizers mentioned that the audience would be diverse, people of all ages and backgrounds, and that they hoped her performance could bring something special to the evening. She felt a familiar nervous flutter in her chest, but it was accompanied by a growing excitement. She had discovered a sense of purpose in her music, a realization that her talent could create real, emotional experiences for others, and that thought propelled her forward. For days leading up to the event, she practiced quietly in her apartment. She focused not on perfection, but on expression, on letting the music carry her emotions naturally. She experimented with small variations in tempo, rhythm, and volume, letting her intuition guide her fingers. Each time she played, she discovered subtle nuances in the pieces she had prepared, elements she hadn't noticed before. Her confidence was growing, not because she had mastered every note, but because she had learned to trust herself, her emotions, and the power of honesty in music. The day of the event arrived. She carried her small bag of sheet music, though she knew she wouldn't rely on it entirely. She wanted the music to come from her heart, not the page. The hall was buzzing with activity when she arrived. People were chatting in groups, enjoying drinks, and exchanging smiles. The space was larger than the previous venues, and the high ceilings amplified every sound. She felt a flutter of nerves, but she reminded herself that this was not about fear. It was about sharing something meaningful. She inhaled deeply, letting the calmness wash over her, and approached the piano. Sitting at the keys, she allowed herself a quiet moment to adjust to the instrument. It was smooth, polished, and responsive, its sound rich and warm. Her fingers hovered above the keys as she felt the familiar tingling of anticipation. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, the hours of practice alone, the small triumphs and setbacks, the first audience that had heard her, and the emotions she had shared through music. It was more than just playing now. It was communicating something deep and human. She began with a simple melody, soft and deliberate. Immediately, she noticed the audience's attention shift. People turned toward her, curious and attentive, as if drawn by the sound. The room grew quiet, the hum of conversation fading, replaced by the resonance of the piano. She felt the music filling the space, gently yet powerfully, carrying a quiet message that everyone seemed to understand. It wasn't just a performance. It was a shared moment, a connection that didn't need words. As the tune progressed, she allowed herself to explore further. Subtle variations, gentle crescendos, and pauses that lingered in the air transformed the simple piece into something expressive and alive. She could feel the energy of the audience responding, a quiet wave of emotion moving through the room. Some leaned forward, eyes soft with reflection, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. She realized that the impact of her playing went beyond mere skill. It touched hearts in ways that were invisible but deeply felt. The piece grew bolder as she continued, and she felt a wave of freedom in her performance. Her hands moved across the keys with confidence, creating layers of sound that felt natural and heartfelt. The music wasn't just for herself. It was for every person in the hall, every listener willing to open their heart. She noticed subtle reactions, an older man pressing his hand to his chest, a young woman blinking back tears, children sitting quietly, captivated by the beauty of the sound. Each response reinforced her understanding of the power of music. She allowed herself to sink completely into the moment. Every note, every chord, every pause carried emotion. She could feel the room breathing with her music, the collective focus of the audience creating an invisible energy that lifted the piece even higher. She realized that performing was not just about playing notes accurately. It was about being present, feeling deeply, and sharing honestly. That presence, that authenticity, was what connected her to the listeners, and in turn connected the listeners to one another. As she approached the climax of the piece, she felt the intensity build. Her fingers moved with speed and precision, yet there was a softness, a tenderness beneath the power. The music became a living story, full of highs and lows, tension and release, joy and reflection. She glanced briefly at the audience and saw the impact mirrored on their faces. Eyes wide with amazement, lips trembling with emotion, hands pressed gently to chests as if to hold onto the feeling. The moment was almost overwhelming, but she embraced it fully, letting the music guide her and trusting in its natural flow. The final notes approached, softening gradually, echoing through the hall like a gentle whisper. She let each chord linger, giving the audience time to absorb the emotion, to feel the conclusion rather than just hear it. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with anticipation and awe. Then, gradually, applause began. It started quietly, then swelled into a wave of appreciation and admiration. People were standing, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes, all of them visibly moved by what they had experienced. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride, relief, and quiet joy. She had shared a part of herself, and it had been received with gratitude, emotion, and recognition. After the applause, people approached her, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles. They complimented her skill, asked about her background, and shared how deeply the music had touched them. She answered modestly, but inside, she felt a quiet thrill. She understood now that her music was not just a talent. It was a gift, a way to connect, to create memories, and to evoke emotion. It was a bridge between hearts, an invisible language that spoke more profoundly than words ever could. Walking home that night, she felt a sense of calm and fulfillment she had never known. The nerves she had felt before performing had transformed into a quiet confidence, a trust in herself and her ability to create moments that mattered. She reflected on the evening, realizing that music had given her more than an audience. It had given her purpose. She had discovered that sharing her talent could bring joy, reflection, and even healing to others, and that understanding filled her with quiet pride. The days following the performance were filled with practice and reflection. She explored new pieces, experimented with variations, and allowed herself to feel deeply with each note she played. She noticed subtle changes within herself, more confidence, a stronger connection to her emotions, and a sense of responsibility toward her gift. Each performance, each practice session, became a chance to grow, to deepen her understanding of music, and to explore the ways it could touch others' hearts. She realized that her talent was not just a personal escape or hobby. It was a way to create shared experiences, to evoke emotion, and to connect people in profound ways. Every audience, no matter how small or large, was an opportunity to make someone feel seen, understood, or remembered. And with that realization came a sense of purpose she had never felt before. A quiet determination to nurture her gift and continue sharing it, to play not just for herself but for the people who would listen and allow themselves to be moved. By the end of part 4, she had grown even further, not just as a musician but as a person. She understood that her performances were more than music. They were moments of connection, emotion, and humanity. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and to trust the power of honesty in her art. And she knew that this was only the beginning. There were more stages to play on, more hearts to touch, and more stories to tell through her music. She felt ready, confident, and deeply inspired to continue her journey. The morning after the performance, she woke with a quiet sense of anticipation. The applause and warm reactions of the audience still echoed in her mind, but it was more than just memory. It was a feeling, a subtle recognition that something inside her had shifted. Music had always been part of her life, but now it carried a new weight, a new purpose. It was no longer just her passion or her comfort. It was a bridge to other people's hearts, a way to communicate and connect that transcended words. She made her way to the piano in her apartment, fingers brushing lightly across the keys. The familiar feel of the ivory under her hands grounded her. She played softly, letting the notes rise and fall naturally, experimenting with new variations. Each sound carried emotion, a reflection of the night before and the joy of knowing that her music had touched others. For a long time she had played for herself, for her own peace. But now she was beginning to understand the responsibility and the gift of playing for others. The day passed quietly, filled with practice and reflection. She thought about the audience's faces, the small gestures that revealed their reactions, and the subtle moments of connection that had unfolded without words. She remembered the older man holding his hand to his chest, the young woman blinking back tears, and the children sitting quietly, absorbed in the sound. Music had created a shared experience, and she realized how powerful that could be. It was a language of emotion, one that could bridge differences, ease sorrow, and evoke joy. As the week went on, she received unexpected messages from people who had attended the performance. Some shared how the music had reminded them of a loved one, or how it had lifted a heavy feeling they didn't know they were carrying. Others wrote simply to say thank you, explaining that the melody had brought them peace or happiness. She read each message carefully, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced before. These were strangers, yet her music had reached them, touched them, and left an imprint on their hearts. It was a new realization of her ability to affect the world, one note at a time. The invitations to play at other events began to arrive. Some were small, intimate gatherings like the first few she had attended, while others were larger, more public occasions. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but paired with it came excitement. She had learned that nervousness didn't have to hold her back. It could be a sign that she cared, a reminder to be present, honest, and fully engaged with her music. Each opportunity became a chance to explore, to connect, and to share something meaningful. One afternoon, she received a request to play at a local community center for a charity event. The organizers explained that they hoped her performance could create a moment of reflection and hope for the attendees. She felt a quiet thrill. This was different from the other events. It wasn't just entertainment. It was intended to bring comfort, inspiration, and emotion to people who might need it most. She accepted, feeling both nervous and excited to see how her music could impact a crowd in a more intimate, meaningful way. The day of the charity event arrived, and she felt a calm focus she hadn't felt before. She carried her small bag of sheet music but knew she wouldn't rely on it. She wanted the music to come from her heart. As always, the center was filled with people from different walks of life. Families, older adults, volunteers, and children. The atmosphere was warm but quiet, a sense of expectation hanging in the air. She set herself at the piano, letting her hands hover above the keys as she breathed deeply. She started with a simple melody, soft and inviting. Immediately, she felt the room shift. People turned to her, attentive and still, as if drawn in by the sound. She could see them responding in small, meaningful ways. Heads tilting, eyes softening, hands gripping chairs lightly. The music filled the room, carrying with it a gentle, powerful emotion. She allowed herself to sink completely into the notes, letting them reflect the feelings she wanted to share. Hope, comfort, and quiet joy. As she continued, she began to explore variations in the melody. Small flourishes, gentle shifts in rhythm, and subtle changes in volume created layers of emotion that seemed to reach each listener differently. She noticed a young woman near the front smiling softly, holding back tears. An older man in the back leaned forward slightly, his hand brushing across the edge of the piano. Children who had been restless at the beginning sat quietly, captivated by the beauty of the sound. The music was connecting them all in a way that felt intimate, even though they were strangers to each other. With each passing minute, the music grew richer and more expressive. She allowed herself to play freely, trusting the emotion to guide her hands. The simple tune had transformed into a story, one that carried weight, joy, and subtle reflection. She realized that every note had the potential to touch a different heart in a different way, that each pause and chord could create a moment of understanding, comfort, or inspiration. It was a humbling and beautiful realization. As the piece built toward its climax, she felt a surge of energy and connection with the audience. Her fingers moved confidently across the keys, producing a cascade of sound that was both powerful and tender. She could sense the emotional intensity rising, the audience fully absorbed in the music, letting themselves feel in ways they might not have allowed in everyday life. She glanced briefly and noticed small gestures. People holding hands, heads bowed, eyes closed in reflection. The room was alive with emotion, and she felt privileged to be at the center of it. When the final notes rang out and faded, there was a brief silence, a collective pause where everyone seemed to hold their breath, savoring the moment. Then, applause began, soft at first, then building into a wave of appreciation. People stood, clapping and cheering, some wiping away tears, others smiling quietly in recognition of what they had just experienced. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet joy that was both humbling and exhilarating. She had shared something real, and it had been received with gratitude and emotion. Afterwards, people approached her to speak, some visibly moved. They shared stories of how the music had reminded them of someone they loved, helped them through a difficult moment, or simply brought a rare feeling of peace. She listened carefully, responding with quiet smiles and kind words. Each story reinforced the power of what she was doing, the ability of music to reach hearts and create lasting memories. She realized that this was more than performing. It was a way to make a difference, even in small, invisible ways. Walking home that night, she felt a sense of purpose and calm she had never known before. She reflected on the journey from the first hesitant notes she had played alone in her apartment to the ability to move a room full of strangers with music. She understood now that her talent was a gift, and that sharing it could create profound experiences for others. Each performance, no matter how small or large, was an opportunity to touch someone's heart, to offer comfort, or to inspire a moment of reflection. In the days that followed, she continued to practice and explore new pieces. She experimented with melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, letting intuition guide her rather than strict rules. Each session was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to deepen the emotional expression in her music. She noticed subtle changes within herself, more confidence, greater awareness of her own emotions, and a stronger connection to the purpose of her talent. She realized that music was not just sound. It was presence, honesty, and connection. Invitations continued to arrive for performances in different settings, community events, charity gatherings, and small recitals. She began to see a pattern. It was not about fame or recognition, but about the impact she could have on people's hearts. Each performance was an opportunity to create a shared experience, to allow others to feel, reflect, and connect. She felt a quiet determination to continue, to nurture her gift, and to explore the full potential of her music in touching lives. By the end of Part 5, she had grown significantly, not just as a musician but as a person. She understood the power of her music to move people, create shared experiences, and evoke deep emotion. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and to trust the honesty of her expression. And she knew that the journey was not over. There were still stages to play on, hearts to touch, and stories to tell through her music. Each performance was another chance to connect, inspire, and move the world in subtle but meaningful ways. She returned to her piano, letting her fingers dance lightly across the keys. She played softly, experimenting with new ideas, feeling the emotions of the day guide her. Music had become more than a skill. It was a language of the heart, a bridge between people, and a source of joy, reflection, and connection. She understood now that her journey as a musician was just beginning, and that every note she played could create a ripple of emotion, leaving an imprint on the hearts of those who listened. The day of the biggest performance of her journey had arrived. She had been invited to play at a large cultural event, a gathering of hundreds of people from all walks of life. This was the kind of stage that made her heart race in ways she could hardly describe. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement, the familiar flutter in her chest that reminded her she was alive, aware, and ready to share her music. She had come a long way since the first quiet performances in small rooms, and yet, stepping into this vast hall made her feel both humbled and inspired. The hall was enormous, filled with rows of chairs, a high ceiling, and lights that glowed warmly, reflecting off polished surfaces. People were arriving, chatting softly, scanning the room with curiosity and anticipation. She could hear the faint hum of voices, laughter, and footsteps. In the back of the hall, volunteers were making final preparations, adjusting microphones, and arranging the seating. The piano stood in the center of the stage, polished and gleaming, its keys waiting patiently for her touch. She approached it slowly, letting her fingers brush lightly over the smooth surface. A sense of calm settled over her as she took her seat, feeling the familiar weight of anticipation and the quiet thrill of the unknown. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She thought of the people who had listened to her music before, the quiet audiences, the children, the volunteers, and the strangers who had shared their gratitude. Each of those moments had taught her something. About presence, about honesty, about connecting with people not through words but through emotion. She reminded herself that tonight wasn't about impressing anyone or showing skill. It was about sharing a piece of her soul and letting the music speak for her. The hall gradually quieted as the first notes began. She started softly, her fingers gently pressing the keys, letting the sound spread throughout the vast space. Even in this enormous hall, she felt the connection forming almost immediately. People turned their heads, their chatter fading into silence. She could see the audience leaning forward, captivated, some closing their eyes as if they were already inside the story she was telling through the piano. The notes were simple at first, deliberate, honest, familiar yet full of possibility. As she continued, she allowed the melody to grow, exploring subtle shifts in tempo, soft flourishes, and gentle variations that added depth. She noticed small gestures in the audience, hands over hearts, slight nods, quiet smiles, and a few glistening eyes. It amazed her how music could reach across the distance, across differences, and touch the soul in ways words never could. She felt a quiet joy, knowing that the emotions she was conveying were not just her own, but were being shared and reflected back through every listener. Her confidence grew with each note. The simple tune she had started with transformed into something more expressive, more alive. She let herself play freely, guided by emotion rather than strict patterns. Every chord, every pause, every delicate flourish carried feeling. The audience responded, leaning in, absorbing each sound as though it were meant just for them. Even the skeptics, those who had arrived indifferent or unsure, seemed captivated. She could sense it in the quiet concentration, the shifting in seats, the soft intake of breath at particularly moving moments. As the music swelled, she reached a point of immersion she had never felt before. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving faster yet softer, louder yet tender, creating layers of sound that seemed to breathe on their own. The music carried tension, release, hope, and reflection. She could feel the energy of the hall pulsing with her playing, a collective heartbeat formed by the audience's attention and emotion. It was as if every person in the room was listening not just with their ears, but with their hearts. She glanced briefly at the crowd and noticed someone in the front row trembling, tears silently rolling down their cheeks. A child near the back had their head resting on a parent's shoulder, completely absorbed in the music. Couples held hands tightly, and elderly listeners sat with expressions of awe. She realized in that moment that her music had become more than a performance. It was an experience, a journey that each listener traveled in their own way. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a vessel for emotion, memory, and connection. The piece built toward its climax, and her hands moved with both precision and freedom, creating a rich tapestry of sound. She felt a sense of unity, a shared human moment that transcended words, age, or background. She understood that this was the ultimate power of music. It could bring strangers together, allowing them to feel, reflect, and experience life in a concentrated, beautiful moment. Her own heart raced, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of purpose and fulfillment. The final notes approached, and she allowed the music to slow gradually, each chord lingering in the air longer than the last. She could feel the room holding its breath, the silence almost tangible, as though the audience wanted to savor every remaining vibration. Then the last note faded completely, leaving nothing but quiet, a quiet that was heavy with emotion, but also with awe and gratitude. The moment stretched, timeless, and she felt a wave of calm satisfaction wash over her. She had given everything to the music, and in return, she had received a connection that transcended explanation. Slowly, applause began. It started softly, uncertainly, then grew louder, swelling into a roar of appreciation. People were standing, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling through quiet sobs. She looked around, her own eyes slightly misty, overwhelmed by the depth of response. She had played from her heart, shared her soul, and every single person in that hall had felt it. The feeling was almost unreal, a mixture of joy, relief, humility, and gratitude. After the applause, she was approached by many audience members, some eager to express how profoundly the music had moved them. They shared stories, quietly and sincerely, of memories, emotions, or moments the music had awakened. Some thanked her for giving them hope, others for bringing a moment of peace into a busy or difficult day. She listened carefully, offering smiles and kind words, but inside, she felt an almost indescribable pride, a sense of having fulfilled the purpose she hadn't even fully realized she carried. Walking out of the hall later that night, she felt a quiet energy flowing through her. The lights outside reflected softly on the wet pavement from an earlier rain. The city was alive, but she felt separated from the noise in the best possible way. The echoes of the piano still resonated within her, a reminder of the connection she had shared, the emotions she had helped evoke, and the lives she had touched with something as simple as a tune played from the heart. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from small, private practices at home to quiet audiences in intimate rooms, and now to a large hall filled with hundreds of people. She had discovered not just a talent, but a purpose. She realized that every nervous moment, every mistake, every hesitant performance had led her to this. Music was no longer just a skill or a hobby. It was a language, a bridge, a gift. And now, more than ever, she understood that she was capable of using it to create profound human connection. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet reflection and continued growth. She explored new pieces, experimented with melodies, and allowed herself to feel freely with every note she played. Each session was an opportunity to learn, not just about music, but about people, emotion, and the power of honesty in expression. She noticed subtle changes in herself, greater confidence, deeper empathy, and a stronger sense of purpose. Her music had become more than sound. It had become presence, communication, and connection. By the end of her journey, she understood that her path was not defined by fame or recognition, but by the moments she created for others. Every performance, no matter the size or setting, carried the potential to move someone, to evoke a memory, to bring joy or comfort. And she embraced that responsibility fully, knowing that the music she played was more than entertainment. It was an experience, a shared human moment, a reminder of the beauty and power of connection. Sitting at her piano in the quiet of her apartment one evening, she reflected on everything she had experienced. She could feel the weight of the journey, but also the lightness of fulfillment. The music she played was hers, yet it belonged to everyone who listened and allowed themselves to feel. She realized that this was the true gift, the ability to share emotion, to connect hearts, and to leave an imprint on the world with something as simple and pure as a piano melody. And as her fingers danced across the keys one last time that night, she knew that this was only the beginning. Each note carried with it hope, each chord created connection, and each melody was a story waiting to be told. She had discovered the incredible power of honesty in music, and she carried it forward, ready to move the world, one tune at a time.